Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Dana Dennis. Good morning. I just want to talk to you guys this morning a little bit about my story. I'm from Crown Heights, Brooklyn, right here, and I'm a home health aide. And so working New Yorkers like myself, we need a reliable subway system, okay? Just to get to work every day for me is a decision. How am I going to get on this train? How am I going to afford it? And it not only affects me, but as a home health aide, it affects my clients. Earlier this summer, in June, there was a huge delay with the queue line, with the Brooklyn Brown queue, and I was on a platform for almost 2 hours. A 2-hour delay in my day is not just a 2-hour delay for me, but for my clients. And the majority of my clients either suffer from Alzheimer's or dementia. So 2 hours throwing off their schedule can mean time medicine. They can be bedbound. They're waiting on me and they rely on me. And so not only are my clients affected, but other New Yorkers who are working as well are affected, and their paycheck may be affected. I'm going through that as well. I not only work as a home health aide, but I work for minimum wage. So every time I have to get on the subway, I'm thinking about how can I afford this? Is this going to take away from my rent, my student loans, my phone bills? Constantly, I worry. Should I walk? Should I take the bus? Do I need to ask someone to swipe me in? If I have an unlimited this month, do I need to swipe someone in who couldn't afford it? That's why proposals like fair fares are so urgent right now, because so many New Yorkers can't even afford the subway system. And the proposal like the one that the mayor presents is also very important. This is something that will help a lot of us moving forward, and the city itself just needs a more sustainable system and sustainable revenue on how we're going to move forward with the subway system. I am also, sorry guys, but I'm a little nervous this morning. Thank you, Mayor.
Wonderful. Give a round of applause.
Thank you. You know, I haven't been able to afford an unlimited Metro card at all this year. 2017 it's been a bit of a hard year for me. And so, like I said, every time I have to take that ride, it's something that I'm thinking about. And in conclusion, I'm glad, that the mayor is supporting this plan. Working New Yorkers, they rely on the subway and they rely on the buses to get ahead. So let's find the money that we need and let's make this work for the city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. That was great. It is great to hear from a rider of the system and to be reminded how, as we all know, the mass transit system is so important for everyday New Yorkers and for the health and economy of this great city. And now it's my honor to introduce the mayor of this great city, Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Thank you to Polly Trottenberg for all you do to keep this city moving, and thank you for your service on the MTA board, where you have been one of the consciences calling for more fairness for the people of this city. Let's thank Commissioner Trottenberg for all she does. And I want to thank you, Dana. That was really wonderful, and it's not easy to get up in front of all the cameras and talk about your own life, but you did it very powerfully, and I think you spoke on behalf really of millions of New Yorkers who every day are dealing with these struggles. And I hear from New Yorkers all the time what it means. You, to your great credit, talked about your patients, the people you want to serve, your clients, and your concern for them. There's so many other stories I hear. People who can't get to work on time, and that affects their paycheck. People can't get to a job interview on time, and that affects the ability to get that better opportunity. Parents who can't pick up their kids at the end of school or daycare on time. Folks who are trying to get to a medical appointment and miss it because of subway delays. This is what's going on. This is not just a subway crisis, it's a human crisis. And New Yorkers are experiencing this every single day. And that demands new solutions. The status quo is not working, let's be clear. So we need new solutions right now, and that's what today is all about. I want to thank all of the folks who are here in support, all the folks around us who have been working for change in this city in so many ways. I want to thank the Borough President of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, and his team for hosting us here in Borough Hall. I want to thank the advocates who have been fighting for a sustainable MTA and for fairness for riders. A special thank you to John Raskin, the Executive Director of the Riders Alliance. Paul Steely-White, the Executive Director of Transportation Alternatives. Someone who I worked with for years and years and understands what everyday New Yorkers go through because she helps their families in so many ways. The Executive Director of Good Shepherd Services, Sister Paulette LaMonaco. Thank you for being here. And you're going to hear from another two of my appointees to the MTA board in just a moment, but I want to thank one other who's done such great work for decades for New York City, Carl Weisbrod. Thank you for all you do for the city. So, everyone, look, we understand that in recent months, what New Yorkers are experiencing on the way to work, on the way to school, is delays like they've never seen before. And we hear the reports every day, the track fire, the signal malfunction, the electrical breakdown. Look, there's been challenges for years, but in the last few decades, I can't remember a time when there was such a concentrated set of problems as just in the last few months. And that's why I call it a crisis. All those years, in fact, decades when the MTA should have been investing in solutions, they didn't. And it's all coming back to hit us now. Everyday New Yorkers are now feeling the brunt. So we know we can't go on like this. And we know New Yorkers are frustrated. Let me ask this group of New Yorkers. Are we frustrated?
Yes.
Do we need a change?
Yes.
This is what I hear everywhere I go. People do not want to see this madness continue. So, you know about the definition of insanity. When something isn't working, you can't do it the same way over and over again and expect a different result. It's time for something new. Now, to get to the changes we need, it begins with a recognition. I think this has actually been happening in the year 2017 more than ever before. It begins with a recognition of who is responsible for the MTA. And I will say it again, the state of New York runs the MTA. The governor of New York appoints the leadership of the MTA. If that point becomes clear to more and more people, it is part of the pathway to a solution. It's clear. The state of New York controls the personnel of the MTA. We've seen that in recent days yet again with yet another appointment. The state of New York controls the budget of the MTA. Taking responsibility is the first step toward a solution. So it's clear that if we're going to get it right, if the MTA is going to work right for everyday New Yorkers, the state has to continue to acknowledge its responsibility and, in fact, take fuller responsibility. And I've said very clearly, for decades, the people in New York City have paid into the MTA over and over again and have not gotten their fair share back. I mentioned to you the other day, $4 spent per subway ride, per bus ride, versus $19 spent per ride by the MTA for a suburban commuter. There's always been an imbalance, and it has to be addressed for the long-term good of the city and the region and the state. So when you think about the history of unfairness, when you think about what New Yorkers give to the MTA every single year, typical year, $10.5 billion from New York City residents and people in New York City contributing to the MTA through their fares, their tolls, and so many other ways. And that's about 2/3 of the operating budget right there, before you talk about all the other things that the city of New York does to support the MTA. Notably, a great example is the $2.5 billion in capital funds we devoted 2 years ago to the MTA, not because we were obliged to, but because we thought it was the right thing to do. The city and the people of the city have done their share, and now it's time for the state to step up. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that. In fact, the state has siphoned off money from the MTA. We've documented almost $500 million taken from taxes and revenues meant specifically for the MTA, siphoned off, diverted to the state budget, never returned. Taking full responsibility means owning up to facts like that. So it's time for the state to return that money to the MTA to address the immediate challenges that the MTA faces. Are we ready for a little bit of fairness? We want to see that money given back to the MTA? So that will help to address the short-term challenges. But we've talked also about the big picture, the long term. And I've said repeatedly, we're ready to work with anyone to help figure out the long-term future of the MTA. It's in everyone's interest to get it right. And that means we're going to have to invest in the kinds of things that were ignored for so long, those basic things that make the subway system run. And we're going to need the revenue to do it. But this time, we need revenue that will be sustainable. We need revenue that will make sure the system gets stronger. And we need fairness, something, as I said, we have not had enough of. Too many people have paid in, have not gotten their fair share back. And too many people who could have been paying a little bit more haven't been. So it's time for fairness when it comes to supporting the MTA. That is why today I am calling on Albany to pass a millionaire's tax to support the MTA. And we need a millionaire's tax so that New Yorkers who typically travel in first class pay their fair share so the rest of us can get around, so the rest of us can get to work, so the rest of us can live our lives here in this city. It's a matter of fairness. And I want to take this moment to commend two leaders who really helped to crystallize this idea in Albany, and I give them a lot of credit for it. I want to thank Senator Mike Gianaris and Assemblymember Danny O'Donnell, who are here with us. Let's give them a big round of applause. They started this ball rolling, and we are now working in common cause. And I want to describe the tax we are proposing. It is a modest increase in state income taxes for those who make $500,000 or more. That means, in fact, fewer than 1% of New York City taxpayers, and this would be focused on people who live in the 5 boroughs and are doing very, very well. It would, to give you an example, for an individual making about $1 million a year, and obviously doing very, very well, I think we'd all like to be making $1 million a year, wouldn't we? We'd be pretty happy with that. That individual will pay about $2,700 more in their annual taxes. What does that mean? If they're paying $2,700 more, it means about $7 a day. To give you perspective, that's about a half hour of parking in a typical Midtown Manhattan garage. So we know there are plenty of people who make $1 million or more, who go in, pay for parking, buy expensive meals, do all sorts of things. They're not going to miss $7 more a day. But for working New Yorkers, it could make a huge, huge difference. What would it mean for the MTA? Well, to begin with, we believe this tax would raise $700 million a year. And we think in short order that would grow to over $800 million a year. And we want to do two things with that money, and I want to be very, very clear. The legislative authors are going to make sure in the bill draft that these things are stipulated, that they are required, because we're not interested in a bait and switch at the MTA or by the state of New York. We want this to be dedicated funding specifically for this purpose. So first of all, $500 million of that money would go to modernize the system. If the MTA chooses to, that money could be used in the bonding process, and that could support up to $8 billion in capital projects. That half a billion, each year would allow the MTA to bond up to $8 billion in capital projects, and they would be specifically for New York City subways, New York City buses, and, of course, the Staten Island Railway as well. It would be money devoted to improving service for everyday New Yorkers. But there's a second thing we want to see happen with this money, also specific, dictated, clear terms that show it would only go to this second purpose as well. And that would be $250 million a year for fair fares for New Yorkers who need them. This means half-priced Metro cards for 800,000 New Yorkers who are at or below the poverty level. Almost 1/10 of New York City will get a break on their subway fare. Now, to put this in perspective, MTA's been around a long time. This would be the first millionaire's tax in MTA history. And it's about time. And let's be blunt about this. There are a lot of wealthy New Yorkers. The folks I mentioned, that less than 1%, 30, 35,000 people who would be paying this tax who are doing very, very well. And they, in fact, do well in part because of the MTA. When the rest of us get on subways and buses to go to work, the folks who own those companies do well. When customers go to their stores and businesses, they do well. If it wasn't for subways and buses that function, they couldn't do as well. So it's about time they pay a little more so the rest of us can actually lead a better life, and particularly so those 800,000 New Yorkers who are struggling so much every single day to make ends meet can actually afford to live in this city. That's what this is about. Now, I'll conclude with this. I want to be very, very clear. In the legislation, it will be clear there's only two proper uses for this money. Again, as for those of you who are enthusiasts of rock music from the 60s and 70s, we won't be fooled again, to quote The Who. We're going to be very clear. In the legislation, this money cannot be diverted, cannot be sent over to the state budget for some other purpose, cannot be used by the MTA for some other kind of need. It is explicitly going to be for two things and two things only: capital improvements to fix the basic operations of the MTA and the fair fare for those 800,000 New Yorkers. Two things only. No three-card Monte, no bait and switch, no moving money away and never giving it back. It's going to be very clear that it has to be used for this purpose. And in conclusion, before I give you a few words in Spanish, look, the status quo today isn't working. It's not working. We know the MTA is not working properly. We all are experiencing that. But we also know it's not fair. We're just not going to continue on the same path any longer. It's time to do something that will really break the mold here. There hasn't been a millionaire's tax for the MTA. Should have happened a long time ago. But with the 1% becoming wealthier and wealthier, it's time for a millionaire's tax so that regular New Yorkers, everyday New Yorkers, can get to work, can get to that doctor appointment. It's time for a millionaire's tax so parents can get to school to pick up their kids. It's time for a millionaire's tax so people who need to get to the doctor don't miss their appointment. It's time for some basic fairness, and that's what we aim to achieve. And we're all going to work hard to make sure that happens. You ready to fight for it?
Oh, yes!
En español, estamos anunciando un plan para que el transporte colectivo sea más rápido, justo y confiable para nuestros trabajadores. Primero, vamos a pedir al Estado los 500 mil millones de dólares que sacó de la MTA. También pedimos al Estado la aprobación de un impuesto a las personas más ricas de Nueva York. Así tendremos más de 700 millones de dólares por año para mejorar nuestros metros y autobuses y reducir la mitad del precio de viaje a neoyorquinos de pocos recursos. With that, I want to bring forward a man who has been a champion of the fair fare, and I'm honored to have him as one of my members of the MTA board, the CEO of the Community Service Society of New York, David Jones.
I'll be very brief. When our research began to reveal that there were poor people earning $24,000 or less, couldn't afford the fare, we began to recognize that this became a critical issue on issues of poverty. that we have 1 million or more people living below $24,000 for a family of 4. We have 300,000 people who are earning half that, 12,000 for a family of 4. That's impossible for people. This would be potentially, if we can get funding for this, and the mayor's proposal does just that, this would provide nearly $700 per family, or per individual actually, based on a half-price fare. That's the calculation we're at. When we decided to work on this, we joined with the Riders Alliance, who have been really the engine of public mobilization for us. And certainly when I was talking to the mayor about this appointment, he may not have realized how obsessed I was about this, to say the least, but he had willingness to take the risk on me. And basically, it is really happy times to have this proposal of providing a half-price fare for the poor of the city of New York, and basically not any poor, the working poor. This is the engine that builds and sustains not only them and their families, but middle and upper-class people, so they can have this incredible city with parking lot attendants, car washers, you name it. People who are really the glue that holds New York City together. So again, we're fully in support of. We hope to have this pass the legislature with flying colors, but we'll keep at this as long as it takes. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor.
Very much, David. Well done, David. Yes, David, you have been obsessive, but it's for a good cause, and thank you so much. I want to note we have 2 wonderful leaders and advocates here, one of whom has been literally synonymous with the needs of subway riders and the fight for fairness for subway riders for decades. I'd like to thank the chief spokesman for NYPIRG's Strap Hangers campaign, Gene Rushinoff. Thank you for being here. And a great leader from Brooklyn who has stood up for communities all over the city, Dr. Una Clark. Thank you so much for your leadership. Oh, and the shy and retiring Hazel Dukes, the president of state NAACP. Thank you for your support and your leadership. And now my honor to introduce another one of my appointees to the MTA board, and she has been a tremendous advocate for a better MTA, the executive director of the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, Veronica Vanterpool. And I'm giving you extra height.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon. Seemingly, we have an egalitarian transit system. You swipe your Metro card for $2.75, you can get on the subway or the bus, and you could be standing next to someone who is a multimillionaire. But what we know is that inherent in our transit system are inequities, and those inequities are not distributed evenly. We have individuals for whom the delays every day that they encounter have a significant impact on their job performance, on their family and personal activities, on their health. And what this proposal does is attempt to rectify this inequity. The last time the state legislature enacted a new tax for the MTA was in 2009, and it was the payroll mobility tax. The logic is the same for this proposed tax. Those people who benefit the most, who derive the greatest economic benefit from proximity to our transit system or access to our transit system, should contribute more. The payroll mobility tax resulted in the 12-county downstate region paying a little bit more into our transit system. And what we're asking is that those who make additional income pay into our system. Those inequities that we see across our system, again, they're not distributed evenly. And this is not meant to be punitive. This is saying all of us have skin in the game. All of us have to put in. We as riders do not experience the frustrations equally. Those who have additional resources are blessed because many of them have other options. If their subway line is taken out of service, they can opt to take another mode of transportation, another mode of transit. Most people who ride our subway and our bus system do not have that luxury, do not have that advantage. So this is not meant to be punitive. This is saying we all have skin in the game. There are many opportunities and options to look at ways to bring more revenue into our system, and I applaud the leadership that we've seen. Over the years, there's a lot of blame to go around, and historically, New York City has been to blame, And New York State has been to blame. Our federal government has been to blame. Certainly the MTA has been to blame. But where we are right now is we have certain leadership in place. These are problems that have happened over decades. But we have leaders in place now who need to make a difference to rectify this, to propose and put forth solutions that are equitable, that are long-standing, that are stable, and that is what we need for our transit system. So I just want to thank Mayor de Blasio, my colleagues on the MTA board, my colleagues in the advocacy community, John Raskin, Rebecca Balin, Jean Rushinoff, of course, David Jones, and others. For 10 years, we've been talking about a lot of these problems. They have certainly come to a head. We are at a point of urgency right now, and everyone's skin has to be in the game. Thank you.
And now I want to bring up the two authors of the legislation in Albany, and I really want everyone to thank them for their vision and their leadership, and we look forward to fighting side by side. Senator Mike Gianaris and Assemblymember Danny O'Donnell, come on up. Did you like it? It's up to you. It's your choice if you like the height or not.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank Mayor de Blasio for the incredible leadership he's showing on this critical issue at this critical moment in history. Yes, I heard someone clap. Let's hear it for the mayor. And I want to thank the co-sponsor in the Assembly of this proposal, Danny O'Donnell, who's been a great friend and a wonderful leader. I want to start just with some simple facts. The subways are a disaster, and they're getting worse by the day. So the headlines that we see only tell us about the worst stories that are happening on a daily basis. We hear about the trains stuck in the tunnel for an hour and people clawing their way out of it. We hear about commuters walking on the tracks just to try to get to work on time. We hear about the poor kid who had to have a fake graduation ceremony on the train itself because he couldn't make it on time to his actual graduation. We hear about the derailments. We hear about people climbing out of elevated trains mid-stop, hundreds of feet above ground, just to get off the train when it's stuck. Those are bad enough, but on a daily basis, there are delays by the hours, by the 2 hours, by the 3 hours of people who just can't get to work, can't get about their day, can't get to doctor's appointments. It is a crisis of epic proportions, and leadership is only just now starting to realize it and taking the actions that are necessary. Everyone agrees what the problem is. The state has been underfunding and neglecting the MTA for far too long. Okay? Everyone acknowledges that from the governor on down. The state has been neglecting and underfunding the MTA for far too long. So then where's the money going to come from? Where's the solution going to come from? If we want nice things, we have to pay for them, and they're not going to happen by magic. If we want a subway that's going to work, we have to pay for nice subways and a system that's going to work. And are we going to ask working people to shoulder the burden of that? No. Are we going to ask people who are working just as hard as ever just to stay in place in the current economy to fund this plan? No. That's the opposite of fair. We are dealing with a moment in history where the wealthy are wealthier than ever, and God bless them. I'm happy people are successful. Let them do well. But at least let's make sure they pay their fair share to make the city operate, make the region operate, make people get to work on time so the economy is thriving and they can continue to make the money that they're making. This is simple fairness, folks. People that are among the wealthiest that the earth has ever seen live right here in this city. And the least they can do is chip in a little bit more to make sure that the trains run on time, literally.
Amen.
We don't have time to waste. We had an emergency session in the legislature a couple of months back, and Assemblyman O'Donnell and myself said we should not leave that session without dealing with the MTA crisis. We lost that opportunity. But there's no reason we can't go back tomorrow, the day after, next week, whenever it is necessary to get this done, because the crisis is that important to solve and the issue is that critical for all of us. There is no bigger emergency that people are dealing with right now than the state of the mass transit system in this region. And if that doesn't justify going back for an emergency session, I don't know what does. So I know Assemblyman O'Donnell and a lot of my colleagues who are here stand ready to go back when called to make sure this happens. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and work with everyone here and throughout the entire MTA region to make sure we get this done for the benefit of New York City and New York State. Thank you very much.
A world-class city requires world-class public transportation. And if we don't have that, we will cease to be a world-class city. The reality is there are 70,000 delays every single month on the subway system. The fact is, in the last decade, on-time percentages have crashed from the 80s to the 20s and 30s. The worst train in the system, the train I rode here this morning, the number 2 train, which is only on time 32% of the time. For those of us who are old enough to have lived through the 70s and 80s, when our system failed to address the problems to keep the system running, we lived through it and we learned the lesson. The only solution here is a dedicated funding source. Without a dedicated funding source, any money that is put into the state capital is always available to be played with, manipulated, sent somewhere, who knows where. We need a dedicated funding source that says New York will remain the world's capital and we will be able to have a world-class public transportation system. Thank you. And I want to add one other thing, not about the people who live here, about the people who come here. Tourism in the state of New York is an $8 billion industry. Let me repeat that, $1 billion every single year. If the people who come here to see the beauty of New York can't get around New York and they stop coming here, we have an entirely other kind of economic problem that no one knows a solution to. So we have to fix it, and we have to fix it now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, my great pleasure to bring forward a voice for working people, not only in his district, but all over this city as well. Congressman Adriano Espaillat.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. You know, some folks have called this the summer of hell. We held a forum uptown where we had some of the deepest train stations in the city. That's why it's called Washington Heights, the highest point in Manhattan. So we have elevator service and escalator service taking people down very deep in the city. And access to these train stations is horrible. And folks were really complaining. The A-line, we saw a derailment, we saw a track fire up there. So if there's a summer of hell, that's the epicenter of hell up there. And people were really upset, as they should be. See, the public transportation system is a wear and tear system. Of any of you that have a vehicle or have leased a vehicle, you know that the company may give you a guarantee for your motor and your transmission for 3 years, but not your brake pads, because they're wear and tear. You cannot think, Mayor, that you're going to drive your vehicle with 100,000 miles with the same brake pads. It's just not going to work. And so this system is used every single day by millions of New Yorkers and tourists that come to the city. And it is the lifeblood of the economy. Wall Street could be doing very well. The tourist industry could be doing very well, but it's working class New York that makes it that way for everybody. And unless we can get working class people to work on time, the economy will be hurt. And so in that forum, beyond complaining, people wanted solutions. They're tired of whining and complaining. They want solutions. They want to get to work on time. Not a big thing to ask, not a backbreaker. Just get me to work on time. Some people feel that they've been reprimanded by their bosses because they don't get there on time. Some people have said in a survey that was taken by the controller that they lost their jobs. And so that's not New York City. And we must have a dedicated funding stream. We cannot have an unfunded mandate. That's a gimmick. That's a budget gimmick. We got to have a lockbox. We got to have funding dedicated consistently for those brake pads that we're going to have to change every 3, 4, 5,000 miles. And so this is no way around this. We cannot nickel and dime our way out of this problem. We got to have funding. And this is not a backbreaker. It's 0.5%, 0.5% increase, up to 4.4% from 3.9%. For people that are making over $1 million. Heck, if you drive your BMW down to 42nd Street or down to Wall Street, you know, if you drive your Jag down to Wall Street, you could probably afford a $40 a day parking space. But working class New Yorkers must get to work on time. You know, we teach our young people good work habits. You know, dress up for the job. You know, make sure you follow procedures. Make sure you're courteous. But most importantly, get to work on time. So if we can't do that as a city, we're failing. And these men and women that work on the tracks, those tracks are dangerous, dingy, dirty, smelly. That's right. We got to give them the support they deserve. And so if we're going to fix the tracks, we're going to fix the signals, right? We're going to make it safer for them down there in those tunnels. We got to have a dedicated funding street. There's just no way around this. And we will not be able to nickel and dime ourselves out of this problem. New York City deserves better. Working class New York, the people that sit down next to you in the subway and are sweaty and are thinking about their families and how they're going to make ends meet, they deserve a break. And this is the best plan that I've seen put forward. It's real, you can touch it, and it will make the New York City public transportation system a top-class, world-class system as we deserve it. God bless you, Mayor.
Now, my pleasure to introduce a man who's been traveling the subway system, talking to everyday New Yorkers, and really bringing accountability that we need. The chair of the Transportation Committee in the City Council, Council Member Adonis Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor de Blasio, and thank you for your leadership in this and many other issues. Last week, together with Assemblymember Jeff Dinwiddie and many of my colleagues, including Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer, Scott Stringer, Tish Jane, Landers, and many others, I spent 24 hours talking to riders in all 5 boroughs about the challenge they face every day in the subway system. They expressed real frustration and an eagerness to get fixed done now. While the plan put forward by Chair Lauder is a good first step, the truth is we need long-term and recurring revenue to support the massive scale of work that is needed to truly fix what is wrong with our subway and take it to the 21st century. That's why I'm glad that our mayor is putting forward his plan to fix these issues. A plan capable of raising funds not only to undertake vital capital work and signal upgrade, but also to support something near to my heart, fair fares for New Yorkers in poverty right now. As everyone here knows, this was my top priority in budget negotiations, and I was disappointed when we didn't get it done. But it is truly a significant moment that one more time our mayor is standing firmly on the side of these struggling commuters and making this a part of his agenda as well. As we move forward with this plan and the many others I have discussed in recent weeks, our top priority must be implementing a revenue stream for the MTA maintenance, upgrade, and repair that we can rely on for years to come. This will benefit not only the working class and middle class, but also the wealthy community that today we are calling for them to increase their contribution. They need the subway to be better too. This is the only way we can overcome the decay our transit system has sustained over the past few decades. Again, I'm confident that together we can take the transportation system to the 21st century. Hoy estamos aquí dándole las gracias al liderazgo del alcalde de Blasio por atreverse a poner un plan que podrá recaudar $500 millones para la MTA y $250 millones para hacer realidad que la clase trabajadora tenga un descuento de 50% cuando compra su MetroCard. Nosotros tenemos un sistema de tren que está atrasado, que se quedó atrás de Canadá, de Tokio, de Hong Kong y de otras ciudades. Y tenemos que hacer un plan para traer el sistema de transportación de la ciudad de Nueva York, de los trenes, un sistema que se caracterice por la eficiencia y la seguridad. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Council Member. I also want to acknowledge and thank Council Member Brad Lander of Brooklyn. Thank you for your support. And now I want to introduce a man who represents one of the biggest unions in this country, who represents over 100,000 New Yorkers who need to get to work every day. He understands their challenges and their needs, and he's in support. The Executive Director of DC 37 AFSCME, Henry Garrido.
Good morning. You know, over the last few months, we've heard a lot about infrastructure. Echoes of the New Deal, whispers in union hiring halls. But the reality is that infrastructure cannot be just about bricks and mortars. It cannot be just about steel. There has to be a human capital element on that. I represent nearly 2,000 city workers who work in the transit systems in some of the most critical areas that are part of keeping the trains working. Telecommunication specialists who work in switches, information technologies that fix the computer systems behind it, architects and engineers who design the tracks and design the repairs. The reality is, for the last 2 years, we've lost 15% of the people I represent in the New York City transit area, 15%. When the number of workers the complaints continue to go up and the number of repairs need to. And the biggest irony of this is that the very same people who are tasked to fix the subway system cannot get to work because the vast majority of the city workers take the transportation system to get there. I represent 125,000 city workers. If they cannot get to work, New Yorkers cannot get the services that they deserve. When a 911 operator cannot get to work, an entire team sometimes has to be held back because we have staffing issues, and New Yorkers depend on somebody to be behind that call from 911. When an EMS worker cannot get to an ambulance because the trains are delayed, New Yorkers expect no excuses. They expect the work to be done, and it is our workers who are being tasked to do so. Look, one of the biggest ironies of this is that the average CEO now makes 204,000 times what the median salary of a worker today. That could not have happened with an improvement in productivity, and it cannot have happened without the workers and the people that I represent. It is time to do right by them. It is time to make New Yorkers who can afford a little more pay more for the very riches that they are enjoying today. So I applaud Mayor de Blasio. I call on in Albany and all the leaders to step up to the plate, because I've always said a budget, legislative priority, it's a matter of conviction. If you believe in something, you're going to make sure it gets done, and we're going to make sure people hear our voices and the working people. Thank you so much.
Well done, Henry. I want you to hear from two more people. First, she has never been willing, let me start again, never been unwilling, always been able to take on powerful interests, and she, in fact, understands what subway riders are going through, because where she lives, we have some of the most overcrowded subway stations in all of New York City. The Borough President of Manhattan, Gail Brewer.
Kind of like a joke, but the fact is I'm the one borough where all these damn millionaires live, and I still support this project. We know that New York City cannot exist without the subway. It has to be reliable, affordable mass transit. It is, as we know, the engine that keeps this city running and the entire region moving. But we have years of underfunding, and that engine is shuddering to a halt, and we must do something about it, as the mayor and others have indicated. The number of subway delays has increased by 250% in the last 5 years, and only 2/3 of subway trains make it to their destination on time or less than 5 minutes late. 80% were on time or close to on time just 5 years ago, to give you a comparison. So the income tax surcharge that the mayor is proposing today, it is an excellent way. It's not the only way, but it is an excellent way to deal with this emergency. And here's what the mayor's plan gets right. The funding is new, it's recurring. Recurring is the most important aspect. We won't fix a subway that needs $20 billion in signal upgrade, as the IBO told me in a report, by throwing a couple billion at a problem as a one-shot deal. And we can't fix the subway by blowing a hole in existing budgets. So I support this plan, even though everybody who's going to pay lives in Manhattan, because it creates a new revenue stream to fund half-price subway fares for low-income New Yorkers so they can get to work and appointment. Thank you. Definitely the head of CSS, but I also want to thank Nancy Rankin, who does a lot of this work. So I obviously continue to support congestion pricing, Move New York. I might be the only one who supports it, but I do. There are a few others. It too would raise revenue. But I agree with the mayor. The money needs to be new money, and it needs to be recurring money, and I thank him very much, as well as the amazing people from Albany who thought of the plan. And I love Gene Roshenoff and John Rankin and our amazing DOT commissioner. Thank you very much.
Finally, a long time ago, 20 years ago, there was a realization, even back then, that the rich were getting richer and that working people were not being represented enough in the political process. And a group of people got together to do something about it. One of them is with us here today, the director of the New York State Working Families Party, Bill Lipton.
Good morning. I think it's still the morning. So in 1986, the federal marginal tax rate on the wealthiest Americans was 50%. For more than 30 years, though, Republicans and too many Democrats in D.C. and here in Albany have cut income taxes for the wealthy and asked working families to pay more in property taxes, in sales taxes, in fares, in fees, and tolls. Meanwhile, our standard of living has stagnated and in many cases declined. We're here today to reverse that injustice and ask the wealthiest 1% to pay their fair share so that we can have a system that works for all of us. Since the beginning, New York has helped millions of Americans find their way into the middle class by investing in public goods, in our schools and universities, in our parks and libraries, and in our subways and our buses. Those public goods have made it possible for countless generations to advance and move into the middle class. Those have been world-class institutions that were free, or in many cases nearly free and affordable in the past. We need to get back to that. So we need to get back to New York's promise, not just of freedom, but of opportunity for everyone. So we're here today united to say to the governor, join us in asking the wealthiest 1% to pay their fair share for the system they helped create, that they've benefited from so much, so that we can make New York's transit system a world-class institution once again. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take questions on this topic, and then we will take questions on other topics. Dave.
You're great, but I don't see this going anywhere in Albany, and they got to say,
well, Dave, I really like you, but do you have a vote in Albany?
No, but you see the comments.
Ah, wait a minute. I'll challenge you right away. I have experts. Where to go? Mike and Danny will speak to it, who live it every day. But wait a minute. There's an urgency here, Dave. You heard it. You heard it. Things are profoundly different. The statistics Gail just gave, something has changed in just the last few years, particularly the last few months, and it's driving New Yorkers crazy. Subway is not working, and that's creating a tremendous amount of pressure on Albany to actually do something different. So I think you would agree, in moments of crisis, the political landscape starts to change. I also think at the same time, this has been brewing for years. You certainly saw it the last couple of years on the national level. More and more people believe the wealthy should pay their fair share in taxes. So there's two things going on here at once. One, the people are demanding a solution to the MTA crisis. Two, people want to see the wealthy pay their fair share. This proposal addresses both simultaneously. I think it's going to be very hard for a lot of people in Albany to say no to that. Does my colleagues want to speak to that?
I'll take this from the low spot. Just to be clear, the proposal we're introducing would apply only to city residents. Okay, so anyone that represents areas outside the city, as a lot of the Senate leadership does, their constituents won't be affected other than getting better train service, which in theory they should want, right? Because all the LIRR riders, all the Metro North riders, when they get off at Grand Central or Penn Station, they're then getting on the subways. So if you don't think they're hearing about the problems from their own constituents, then you're missing the boat. And they may posture now at the beginning, but the more pressure they get from the people they represent about how bad the system is, I think there's room to maneuver in Albany. Never mind the fact that there's actually more Democrats than Republicans in the state Senate. And so if all the Democrats get together, at least behind this proposal, never mind the leadership struggle, we should be able to make progress on it.
Mr. Mayor, how do you ensure that a dedicated revenue stream like this, which is not subject to negotiation year to year, doesn't just give the state an excuse to then scale back on what they contribute to?
Well, I'll start on that. I mean, again, you know that money that was taken, that $500 million, was from tax revenue explicitly by law dedicated to the MTA. And it's time for the state to give that money back. And I won't be surprised if that becomes a legal issue unto itself if that doesn't happen. But in this case, you're talking about brand new legislation written by these two leaders that will stipulate legally binding language that the money has to go to those purposes. I'll give you a great example, which you're familiar with. One of the most effective taxes we ever saw in the history of the city was the Safe Streets, Safe City tax, which was explicitly and only for the increase in the number of police officers and the after-school programs, and it went to just those purposes. So you can stipulate that in the legislative process.
It's not that they would take this money away. We know this money would go there. What's to stop the MTA from then saying, oh, okay, all this money's now going there. It's dedicated.
Absolutely.
Why should we?
No, very important question. I'll start, and my colleagues can speak to it because they'll be the engineers of this. This is classic in legislative wording, to have language that avoids supplantation, that continues maintenance of effort, that requires, you can't bait and switch. So you can't take this new revenue and suddenly, siphon off other revenue and send it somewhere else. You have to keep all your previous efforts in place, and this is additional to it. And that's a matter of law, the way it'd be written.
The state has promised $8 billion plus another $1 billion when the governor made a state of emergency declaration for the capital plan. The legislation will require that that money continues to be spent for the purposes intended, and this will be on top of that.
It's not just the intent or the words, it's also the general public sentiment of what that is that drives a lot of this. I think the mayor is entirely correct. We're in a crisis mode here. And when there's a crisis mode, people pay attention to things that sometimes they don't pay attention to. I think the public is paying attention to what the MTA is, who runs it, who appoints them, and what they're doing with the money. And so this bill, when it comes into law, will further focus the attention on the MTA and the need for a world-class public transit system.
The people that you're essentially trashing actually take the 4, 5, and 6 to
People that I'm what, please?
The people that you're essentially trashing.
That's your editorial comment, my friend. There's nothing trashing.
Down the Fulton Street, Wall Street.
Wait a minute, are you editorializing or are you asking a question?
No. How are they not taking the 4, 5, and 6 every single day down the Wall Street and Fulton, and they themselves are not essentially taking a Jaguar, a Lexus down to their jobs and are not hard workers?
Which outlet are you with, may I ask?
I'd like to know.
Just asking you a question. Which outlet are you with?
Then with the Daily Caller as well as Sirius XM Patriot Channel.
Uh-huh.
How is it you essentially trashing the people who...
Okay, so you obviously have a political axe to grind, and let me be clear. We said it very clearly. We're not begrudging anyone's success. But the success that many wealthy people have achieved has been because of government policies that favored them, a tax code that favored them. Sure, and we think that's great, and they also can afford to pay a little more for the good of the whole society, because right now there are laws that are helping them to be as wealthy as they are.
Warfare scheme.
Not class warfare at all. It's saying that people should pay their fair share. Okay, way back there. Yeah.
Congestion pricing that, it's not going anywhere, it's not going to happen, and I'll be here on the waste time on something that's a non-starter. Considering the resistance to increased taxes, particularly in the state Senate, what makes you think that this has more potential to not be a non-starter in congestion pricing?
Yeah, it's apples and oranges to me. When the city of New York is requesting just to be able to tax our own people, I think that changes the dynamics in the state Senate. Obviously, some other things affect suburban residents as well. This would not. And you are very familiar with political realities in the state Senate. That's a big fault line right there. So I think the fact that there is a subway crisis, it's affecting everyone, including suburban residents, but we're saying we're only asking that New York City residents who are wealthy pay that tax. I think that's a sweet spot. Again, my colleagues can speak to the Albany conditions better than I can, but I think it hits a couple of different notes that makes it something that can pass in Albany. And the urgency of the moment is the central point. There has to be a solution, and here's an available one that could make a difference in a very big way, including for all those folks who can't afford the subway fare right now. Hold on, I'll come back to you.
How did you come up with the threshold for $500,000 or $1 million a family and decide how much tax to pay?
For me, it was following up on the model that we originally put forward around pre-K in 2013. Same basic concept. There are a few adjustments, but the same basic concept, that $500,000 in terms of folks who are single, $1 million for folks who are married. And it consistent also with the work that the senator and the assembly member were doing. So it, for me, was based on what we had been doing 4 years ago, and then working together with them to craft something that we thought would make sense. Yeah, Bobby.
Congestion pricing. The governor's office yesterday put out a statement suggesting they would explore the possibility of testing congestion pricing in some form, which I don't think they had done before. What do you make of that from the governor's office?
It's the first I'm hearing of it, and I haven't seen that previously, so I don't know what to make of it, honestly. But right now, I think this is the solution that can start to have a real impact, and also is one that a lot of New Yorkers could get behind. And then my colleagues jump in anytime you want. Yes, sir.
What makes you think that the governor, who already wants you to pay $400 million to immediately repair the subway, is going to sign off on this plan?
I think there's going to be a lot of pressure. It's the political process. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure from the grassroots for this change to happen. I talk to more and more New Yorkers who understand that the governor and the state control the MTA. They want accountability. They want change. This is a way to bring new resources in. And look, we see it every passing year that folks who are doing well are doing better and better. I mean, it's literally, we see the statistics. You heard that example of what's happening with CEO pay compared to what it used to be. This is a matter of fairness to say, okay, here's something that right now can start to put resources in the hands of the MTA. It's available. It could be done very quickly. It's based on models that have worked before. So I think that's why. I think it's the urgency and the fact that it's a readily available plan.
Joe Lopez said over the weekend and this morning that while a continuous revenue stream is a good idea, that the emergency repairs are so dire, he needs money now and can't wait on the legislature. Your response to that?
I've said it many times. That money is available right now. The state just has to give back the money that it took away from the MTA. Now, I imagine, for example, if we were having the same conversation about anything else at the city level, and you had evidence that I had taken money away from, say, the Department of Education, and then there was a crisis in our schools that needed to be addressed, you would be asking me right now, why don't you give that money back? Let's just be real. Let's be consistent. Ask the same question of the state that you ask of the city. The money was taken from the MTA budget. Put it back. That will fund LODA's plan. It's that simple. Go ahead.
Fares program, how they'll qualify, and if undocumented New Yorkers will be covered with the Fair Fares program?
What was the first part? I couldn't hear the beginning.
Who will qualify and how?
Who will qualify? All right, I want to see which member of my team or of our legislative leaders wants to speak to the specific construction around the Fair Fare standard. Dean? Dean Foulahan, the mysterious Dean Foulahan has emerged, our budget director.
It would apply to about 800,000 New Yorkers below the federal poverty level. That is the proposal. It's very consistent with what David Jones and the group had put out. And it would be half price on the Metro cards. It would be to all residents of New York. And it would take, we're assuming, about a 2-year phase-in to fully get to that number.
David.
A couple of weeks ago, you were asked whether New Yorkers would support, paying more money to the MTA. And you said something to the effect of, let's use the money that we have. But what changed between then and now?
Well, one, David, the money that they have, I just referred to, I think it was a minute and a half ago, that the money the state has it needs to give back to the MTA, point one. I said at the time, and you've been in the room a bunch of times, there is a long-term issue that has to be resolved with everyone at the table. Here is a way to start to resolve the long-term situation. But the short-term situation should be based on the money the state has right now.
This is a proposal, as you mentioned before, that essentially mirrors what you did in 2013.
Yes.
Proposed a mansion tax in Albany.
Yes.
Both those efforts haven't, we talked before about sort of the definition of insanity. What's going to change this time?
I think they're all different situations. So let's do all three of them. We proposed a tax for pre-K and after school. We got the next best thing. We got a consistent funding line from Albany. So I'm going to score that one as a victory. Proposing a tax got us the money, and guess what? There's 70,000 kids going to pre-K right now, and we've doubled the number of kids in after school at the middle school level. So we proposed the mansion tax, which is a very different kind of tax for those who buy expensive homes. There was a lot of support in the city. We could not yet prevail in Albany. I think there's obviously the chance there'll be major changes in Albany going forward. I think that option is going to be smiled on in the near future in Albany. There's a ton of support because 25,000 seniors will get affordable housing, and they certainly want to see that change. This now is about a crisis that all of you rightfully have been talking about nonstop for months, and you will continue to until it's resolved. There's a lot of pressure on Albany to address it. We're taking a model that had a lot of support in 2013, applying it to a crisis moment, which I think adds urgency and intensity to the fact that there has to be a response from Albany. Also, David, I would say on this one, a big change in the course of this year is a recognition among more and more New Yorkers that the state controls the MTA, which for a lot of people they did not know, and more, you see it in every public opinion poll, more and more people get it, and now they're demanding accountability. So we're offering an option, working with our colleagues. Here's a way to solve it.
I just want to frame the answer a little bit differently. The difference here is everyone agrees that money is needed. Okay, the governor has said the MTA is underfunded. The mayor obviously believes that. The legislature believes that. Even the Senate Republicans, I believe that the MTA needs more money. Then it just becomes a question of, well, who's going to pay and where's that money going to come from? And if you look at it through that lens, how on earth can we justify further punishing the people who are already suffering due to bad subway service by asking working people to fit the bill for that? The fairest thing, the easiest thing is to ask those who can most afford it to do it. And on the short-term question, I just want to point something else out. The MTA amended its capital plan maybe a month and a half ago. What was it, John, a month and a half ago, a month ago? Something like that. They moved over $1 billion away from signal fixes and new subway cars to things like subway station beautification. Okay? That happened during this crisis. So for the MTA to say they need the money from somewhere else, how about pulling that money back that they just moved away from the exact things that were needed and making sure we can get the job done?
Question. The first is this. You've said it's certainly one option, but there are other options. Governor Cuomo has floated an idea in the last 24 hours to look at congestion pricing and possibly putting some kind of a surcharge on for-hire cars like Uber and Lyft and others. Do you think that this is the only way that you could raise money, or would you support other options?
I'd have to see other options to be able to judge them. I think this is the best way to get something done immediately that would have a very big impact. And I think it's clear, Marcia, that the wealthy are not paying their fair share in taxes. and we could get a lot done by asking them to pay just a little bit more, both in terms of fixing the fundamental problems of the MTA and providing a lower cost fare for New Yorkers who can't afford the MTA. So I think this is the best option, but we'll certainly look at any other proposal that comes along.
So the second part of my question is this: since the Senate Republicans, the Senate Republicans have already said that they don't support this, what will you do personally to lobby for this? Are you going to go up to Albany? Are you going to meet with them? And the governor is signaling that he doesn't exactly like it either, given the fact that he's pushing congestion pricing. So what do you think that you can do to use your good offices to make this fly?
I'll do whatever it takes. If it's helpful to go to Albany, I'll go there. I'll obviously work closely with the legislators here who are leading the charge. But I think the demand from the people in New York City is what's really going to make the difference, Marcia. I think the people of this city are fed up. They're hurting every day because of what's happening in the subway. They want to see a solution. There is no long-term solution on the table. Here's one that would work. And by the way, I think people have eyes to see. They know the rich are getting richer, and they know the rich are not paying their fair share in taxes. When you add all that together, I think there's going to be a lot of support. That will change things.
Fair funding, maintained throughout the year that you believe it's something that the MTA or the state should be paying for, not the city. And so I'm wondering what changed about that dynamic, because this is still money the city could use for anything in theory if it raises those taxes.
Look, I think if we had the ability to determine our own taxation instead of this semi-colonial dynamic we live with where to be able to tax our own people we have to go to Albany, we could have a whole different discussion. But given the reality of today, I thought this made a lot of sense. When originally I was talking about some of the options, this idea did not occur to me, certainly, of using this kind of method to both address the ongoing physical needs of the MTA and to address the need for the fair fare. I didn't hear those ideas put together originally. Again, I want to give a lot of credit to Senator Gennaros and Assemblymember O'Donnell because they got the ball rolling on the idea of millionaire's tax, and a lot of people started thinking about it and said, here's, with that tax, a way we could address both issues. So that idea made total sense to me. And yeah, it comes from New York City taxpayers, but it comes from New York City taxpayers who should be paying more anyway, in my opinion. I don't get to decide that. That has to be done in Albany. To the previous point, I think this is one that actually could get passed in Albany because of the crisis. So I would consider that a net gain for everyone and a fair way to resolve the issue. And I think it's a pretty impressive combination of pieces that all of these folks here today are fighting for. It combines a couple of different efforts into one thing that really had not occurred to us until very recently. Aaron. Yeah. Would I accept the state giving us a lot more money? Yes. Call me old-fashioned. Aaron, look, I think a tax on the wealthiest New Yorkers to address the MTA problem is fair, and it could be the most sustainable solution, particularly since it will be written to dictate that money only go to the MTA and only to these specific purposes. But if Albany, once again, if some leaders in Albany, for whatever reason, are not willing to tax the wealthy, but they want to put additional money into the MTA to achieve these same goals, that would clearly still be a victory. Gloria.
So Mayor, two questions. Can you address some of the criticism people have said that a tax like this is going to cause for mass exodus of the city's millionaires to leave? And when you talk about congestion pricing and the problems that the city has with congestion, why not make drivers pay more? And you talk about the drivers who drive their cars and pay for parking spots. Why not ask those folks to pay more?
Look, again, I, for many years, have never seen a scenario where this was a realistic option in terms of Albany. And I have never seen a proposal that addressed a lot of the equity issues that would be created for people in the outer boroughs, for people who are low income and use their cars. There's a host of issues that, again, I've just never seen addressed in this discussion. I think this is a better way to go about addressing the immediate challenge because it asks those who've done very well to do a little more and it goes to some of the most immediate needs of the MTA system. It's clean, it's straightforward, it's something that could be acted on very, very quickly. So I haven't seen that in other proposals.
Just leaving the city.
Say again? Oh, I'm sorry. So there's two things I've heard over the years, and my colleagues may want to jump in, and Bill Lipton may have special expertise on this question because he's been involved in every effort to raise the minimum wage, and every time we were told business would collapse, jobs would plummet, and the exact opposite happened. So every time we've talked about raising taxes on the wealthy, we get the concern, will the wealthy leave? From what I'm seeing, the wealthy have been coming to New York City in record numbers. Look at all those tech entrepreneurs who are streaming into New York City. Look at all the people who want to live here, who have the money, can afford the lifestyle that they want to live in New York City, and are not interested in being somewhere else where they can't have that lifestyle, or they can't have the opportunity to do business that they find here. So I'm always willing to look at data, but I've never seen any data that proves that point.
How will you make sure that the money will go towards the capital improvements and the fair fare? It won't get siphoned off. And also, what if this just doesn't work? What are you going to do?
Then you write a new law. And that's part of the problem with legislating in general. Obviously, there are mechanisms where you can use dedicated revenue and define what the dedicated revenue is to be used for. Most specifically, you need, in this crisis, to come up with a solution that's recurring. Throwing $50 million, $500 million, $5 billion at the problem once is not going to fix the problem that exists 2 and 3 years going down the pike. We need to ensure that there is a funding source that is available, dedicated, recurring, to keep and maintain New York City's subway system as a world-class system. And if we don't, we have failed. And, Mr. Mayor would like to get rid of all of us in Albany because we were in his way. Every mayor I've been through wanted to get rid of Albany. We're there. And Senator Gianaris and I will continue to make sure that we fight to ensure that the money is used the way we dedicated the money to be used.
Let me see. Come right back to you. Let's get Anna hasn't had a chance.
I have a couple of questions. New York City taxpayers already shoulder the burden of most of the MTA's capital plan. So this would essentially raise that burden for a certain number of those taxpayers?
Yep. 32,000.
Fair?
Because 32,000 people have done very, very well because of what they, in most of them, have experienced here in the city. They have benefited from being in the city. They've benefited from the MTA getting, again, their workers to work and their customers to their businesses. And to ask them to do a little more is absolutely fair. Again, maybe this is a moment in history challenge, but you heard some of the previous speakers talk about what the tax rate used to be on wealthy people. It's been a very cynical reality, Anna, over the last few decades, how the tax rate has been consistently knocked down for wealthy people, and the country's been suffering and the city's been suffering as a result. So, no, but I'm saying I think it is absolutely fair to ask that 32,000 to pay more. I don't consider them to be in the same boat as the other 8 million plus people who are struggling in so many cases to make ends meet. I think that group can afford to pay more.
What I was trying to ask is why not make this a statewide thing since the city taxpayers have been funding capital improvements statewide?
Very fair question, but I think this is where I believe it maximizes our chance to get the thing done, to have it be a tax focused on wealthy New York City residents. In terms of Albany, we all understand the challenges getting something done in Albany. I think this makes it more palatable to a lot of the upstate legislators and suburban legislators, and the money's there. That's the other fact. The money is there. You hear the dollar figure this would achieve. It would make a huge difference for the MTA. So that is a tip of the cap to practicality. I think it's the best way to get it done.
And then a follow-up on congestion pricing in New York. That plan has been out for, I believe, at least 2 years now, before all this attention started being paid to the subway crisis. Have you read that plan? And I don't understand why raising the tax on the wealthy would be more practical than a bipartisan plan that's been out for multiple years.
Okay, I have no idea how bipartisan or not it is. I was briefed on it in 2013. I have not looked at it since because I've never had any reason to believe it had any chance of passage. I think this is a very different proposal we're putting forward here that has a equity core to it that's really, really powerful. I can't speak to the other plan because I'm just not up to date on it. This one, as I said, 4 years ago was the last time I looked at it carefully because I realistically understood it had no chance of going anywhere. The plan that we're putting forward speaks to equity. It asks those who have done well to pay more, and it addresses the needs of 800,000 people who in so many cases can't afford to get on the subway. That's why this plan right now is available and one that can make a difference and one that I think can be passed.
Mr. Mayor, the MTA has many problems, not only the subway, but they have Metro North, they have the Long Island Railroad, and generally speaking, they're going to need money for those things as well. I'm wondering, given the fact that the MTA is going to want to do something more globally, I would imagine, if you would support a millionaire's tax in the metropolitan, the MTA region, Long Island, Westchester, on millionaires in the broader area so that you could support the transit needs of everybody who lives in the area?
Look, I think there needs to be more fairness across the board, and I think those who have done well all over need to pay their fair share in taxes. I'm not as knowledgeable about what those models might be for the region or for the state, but here's what I'd say. I think this plan makes sense right now because I think it's the one that has the best chance of getting passed, and because there certainly are enough millionaires and billionaires in this city to pay this tax to allow us to make these changes. If there's other things we can do beyond that, I'm all ears. But this is the one I think has the best chance of getting done. Rich.
Stall tactics.
Go ahead, Rich.
$4 billion. Mayor.
Yes.
$4 billion. You've talked to any millionaires? Are they on board?
Rich, what I've always found is there are some who are and a lot who are not. That's just typically been the case. I know a lot of people who are wealthy who recognize the wealthy are paying a lot less in taxes than they used to and recognize a lot of problems in our society that need to be addressed. And I certainly have met wealthy New Yorkers who say, I'm ready to pay more. I've met others who are not. But in the end, that's not where the vote is. The vote is among the members of the Senate and the Assembly. And it'd be great to have some wealthy people come on board and support, but I think the voices of millions of New Yorkers are what's really going to make the difference here. See, there's anyone on this side on this topic? Go over to this side. Yes, Melissa.
Stop me if this is what Marcia asked. I couldn't hear her question. But if the leaders in Albany were to coalesce around the congestion pricing plan before this plan, will you continue to push for a millionaire's tax? And will you be vulnerable to criticism that you just are interested in taxing the wealthy?
Well, if there's a criticism that I'm interested in taxing the wealthy more, I'll accept that criticism. Because I am interested in taxing the wealthy more. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that's about righting the wrongs of the last few decades where the 1% have been asked to pay less and less in the way of taxes. I want to move the plan that has the best chance of getting something done. I think this is that plan. If other plans start to move, we'll certainly look at them.
Address this, two questions really. Have you addressed this plan to, Madam Director, part of the governing Senate majority? Have you spoken to Senator Marty Golden? Have you spoken to Senator Sinterfelder? Have you spoken to Jeff?
There'll be time for all that. I mean, this is just being announced with our colleagues. Obviously, they have put this idea in the bloodstream previously. We're working together now. We'll have time to go to all of those leaders. I'll certainly talk to all of them, and we'll start organizing New Yorkers to get it done. I understand a lot of the questions here are about will I talk to a leader? We'll do that. That's not how change happens. Change happens from the grassroots. And what I think is going to happen here is more and more New Yorkers are going to say, yeah, I want the subway fixed, and this is a way to do it. I want the wealthy to pay their fair share, and that's what's going to move the spectrum, not charming conversation.
What is your response to these PWU workers who are
Yeah. Look, I want to say that first of all, and I want to ask everyone to join me in this, I have some political differences with their union leadership on some issues. But the people who do the work every day in our transit system deserve our respect and our praise, and I want to thank them. Okay, last call. Any other questions on this topic? And we'll go to others.
The millionaire's tax, you don't see the movement of that in Albany. Will you look to fund fair fares through other city resources?
Again, I believe this is something that is absolutely caught up with the question of who's responsible, right? And I made the point about a millionaire's tax would have to be approved by Albany. And if it were structured to ask those who have done very well to pay their fair share, I would consider that a fair outcome. It still means Albany stepping up and taking responsibility for the situation, not forcing expenses on the city. I want to remind you, this has to be seen in light of a number of other forays in the last few years. You all saw the budget effort a year and a half ago to make us pay more for CUNY, make us pay more for Medicaid. You're going to be seeing a lot more of that, by the way. I warn you all right now. You'll constantly see efforts coming out of Albany to make the city pay more. And I say the same thing to it every single time. First of all, Albany needs to step up and take responsibility for the things they run. They run CUNY. They run the MTA. I run the police, I run the schools, I run the sanitation department, I run the parks. That's my responsibility. I'm not going to see our money taken away in an atmosphere where we all know just a few months from now, we might be on the verge of losing a huge amount of federal support, and then the state will also cut support to us. And this is something that anyone watching can do this math really quickly. Federal budget deep cuts to housing, education, etc. That will be cuts to the state, there'll be cuts to the city. The state will turn around and take away money from the city. So we'll be hit twice, double jeopardy. We'll have to survive on our own. The only thing we have is our own resources to get by. There'll be no cavalry coming to help us. By the way, we're also not going to be shocked at the same time if the wealthy get a huge tax break from Washington. So all of these things are happening at once. My answer is we're going to protect our prerogatives here. We want the state to take their responsibility for their piece. All right, let's go to other topics. Other topics, yes.
How about how you're preparing for Trump's visit next week?
The NYPD is the most expert police force on earth in terms of handling visits by an American president. They do an outstanding job. I think we're going to be ready by any measure. And I do want to say it's been a lot less than we expected. We expected President Trump might be back a lot. He's only been back once previously, and to his credit, he kept the time here very limited and the disruption very limited. So hopefully that will be the same this time. Okay. Yes?
Rahm Emanuel, he's going to sue the Justice Department.
He what?
He's going to sue the Justice Department over the sanctuary city policies. Are you going to join him on that lawsuit?
Well, if there is a specific effort to withhold funding, we're ready to join in legal action to stop it. So far, there has not been any funding withheld. So our message is, if funding actually starts to be withheld, then we will take legal action. Yeah.
The lawsuit filed this morning by Joralemon St taxpayers regarding the reimbursement of
It's the definition of frivolous. Simple standard. Anyone who works for an organization and there's a legal issue related to their work, and this will be true of every one of you, if there's a legal issue related to your work at your job, it would be right for your job to cover those legal expenses. That's the conclusion I came to. That's been the history for decades. It's just a frivolous lawsuit. Aaron? Just speak up a little more, I'm sorry. Both are true. I never knew them well. I've told you guys many a time, these were part of a slew of people who suddenly wanted to be connected to our world when I won the election. I didn't know them. I heard that they had been involved in the community. Just never knew them personally. And then you saw they sent emails, and what typically happened was they didn't get what they wanted. Yes, David?
On that same topic, some of the interaction that you had with them very rapid. They would email and you would email back within minutes. Is that typical of your interaction with constituents in New York City?
It's typical of my interaction with people I know. I get emails all the time, and if I'm looking at my email, I try and respond right away because I want to get it off my plate. And it's consistent. Look, people come up to me all the time. People reach out to me all the time. I don't know if you were at the town hall meeting in Harlem last week, but this is sort of typical of what I experience, whether I'm on the street or in the subway or at a town hall meeting. People say, here's a problem. I have a witness. I often say the commissioner will follow up, or even in many town hall meetings, I've said the commissioner will come to your block or come to your specific organization and sit with you and meet with you. It's one of the ways to do things.
All because they have no other way of getting to you. These folks had a direct line to you within weeks of you being elected.
Well, so do you. There are people who, I mean, there's the media, there's elected officials, there's community leaders, there's folks like those sitting in the front row who I've known for years and years. There are people you know who, if they reach out to you, you respond. I think it's part of human life. Look, this rezoning is unusual compared to all the others because it's the Speaker's own district. And the Speaker and I, as you know, work very, very closely together and have for years. We've had multiple conversations about the rezoning and will continue to. So this is true of many situations when it comes to land use, that there are real concerns raised at the community level, real concerns raised by elected officials. I think what's good is when you then hear those concerns and try and work them through and try and find a solution that people feel pretty good about, and certainly most importantly, the person whose vote matters the most, the representative of that district in the council, feels good about. And there's plenty of time to do that. So we'll stay at the table having those conversations. Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, getting back to the emails, these are people who donated to your campaign, who had your personal email. In fact, one of them felt so close to you that he said a recommendation for an appointment, and you sent back an email saying, Jonah, I'm all ears. I wonder what kind of a message that sends to people about a possible pay-to-play culture at City.
I reject that notion. I reject it out of hand because people offer their ideas all the time to me, whether they are elected officials, community leaders, people I meet on the street, just everyday citizens. I listen. Sometimes those are good ideas. Other times there's not. I'll listen. Those ideas those guys were putting forward typically were not good ideas and were not given the time of day by those who looked at them.
Personal email.
Because people you know have your personal email. It's as simple as that. Well, you have a different relationship with me than many, many other people.
Donors who had your personal email.
I have people I have worked with for years, as I mentioned, leaders, community activists, elected officials, business leaders who reach out to me in all sorts of ways. And donors are allowed to reach out in a democratic society and put their ideas on the table. The question is what happens with them. Anything they put forward was looked at on the merits and, again, typically in their case, rejected. Yeah.
Just a really quick question. When was the last time you rode the Staten Island Railway, if you've ever ridden it?
I have ridden it, but not for quite a while. I can't give you an exact date. I don't know. I really don't know. I've ridden it, but I can't tell you when.
Does the city intend to more vigorously enforce this ruling regarding XXX businesses around the city, particularly the Times Square areas?
Well, explain the question. What do you mean by that?
In June, the State Court of Appeals reinstated a 2001 rule banning the XXX establishments in certain parts of the city.
Right.
Some businesses in the Times Square area were able to get past that, the 2001 ruling by having a certain amount of material that was not considered XXX but still selling some. Some businesses are concerned that a reinstatement of this ruling in June will jeopardize their businesses.
So they're concerned that those type of stores would be able to reassert themselves in some way? Yeah.
So they're going to have to go out.
Look, this is, I'm not an expert on the ruling at all, but I can state the obvious. This is always a tension in terms of what rights people have under the Constitution versus how we want to have a certain quality of life that respects everyone. This is always a challenge. We will enforce the law vigorously. So if the law has been amended, we'll work with that amendment. But for those who are concerned about the reinvigoration of those type of businesses, I can say very squarely, we'll use all of our powers to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll stay within the law, but we'll be very aggressive in our enforcement. Thanks, everyone.